How we view the workplace has drastically changed over the last couple of years, especially with regard to the workplace purpose and function. Today, we'll address some of the key findings from Coor's latest report, Join the Workplace Revolution. And this is a report based on a market study that was conducted earlier this spring and was conducted in all Nordic countries. So why do we talk about a revolution? Employees feel more empowered today than ever before and have new demands regarding their working life. This means that employers need to find new strategies and solutions in order to meet these or maybe even exceed these expectations that employees have. For those of you who don't know Coor, we're a leading provider of facility management services in the Nordics, and we aim to create the happiest, healthiest, and most prosperous workplaces in the Nordic region. My name is Sara, and I'm one of the workplace strategists here at Coor. I'm a part of a team called Coor Advisory, who works with guiding organizations through the complexity of various workplace challenges. With me here today in the studio, I have my close colleague Oscar, head of advisory, and Joachim, who is our customer experience manager. But that's not all. We also have some guests with us on links here today. We have Brita Helleberg, a psychologist within the field of organizational psychology and business. And we also have Per Christian Helland, Head of Strategy and People Experience at Storebrands. Very welcome. We were also supposed to have Kari Selkela, Vice President and Head of Real Estate at Fiskars with us today, but unfortunately he became sick, so he can't participate this time. Today, we'll start off by talking a bit about the modern employee, together with interesting reflections from Brita. We will also talk about the employer's dilemma with great learnings from Per Christian. And then we will end the webinar by talking a bit about the future workplace and focus then here in the studio, but also with some insights from our dear guests. And hopefully we'll all learn a bit about the experience and the expertise from the people who we have with us here today. At the end of the webinar, we'll also have some time to address the questions that you may have during the time that you're listening to us here today. So don't hesitate to use the Q&A function here in the Teams. And I'm also going to mention that this webinar is recorded, so that this recording will be distributed later after the session. So now that we have gone through those practicalities, let's start off by diving into this first topic of the modern employee. What do the modern employees value, and how has their needs changed during this pandemic, and what role does the workplace play in their working life? And before we discuss this a bit deeper together with Brita, I want to ask you, Oscar, what was some of the most interesting findings from the Join the Workplace report on this subject?
Yes. So I brought with me here then from an employee's point of view, two sets of perspectives or interesting finding areas that we brought with us from the study. Firstly, I will cover some around the general expectations that we see employees now put on their employers. And secondly, a bit around how they view the office as a part of the physical office, I should say, as a part of the workplace equation. If we start with the first around expectations, we now see very firm expectations in terms of work location flexibility, meaning that as much as 4 out of 10 employees now will consider another employment if they're not allowed to choose for themselves. Important to stress there that they don't necessarily want to work from home the entire time, but it's the matter of choosing for themselves. That's the important part here. Secondly, we also make a strong note out of 1 in 3 employees now expecting office improvements or improvements in the workplace, the physical workplace, and same there. 1 in 3 will actually leave. Our study indicates if that's not being met. I should also say that we see some differences between different demographics. So the younger generation seems or quite strongly are higher in these figures. The second perspective, office as a part of the workplace and sort of the motivations now, we recognize so the motivations or primary drivers for coming into the office. We recognize very similar topics that's been long debated. Social, the social aspect of coming into the office, collaboration with colleagues, but also learning opportunities are the three primary drivers that we capture from the study of coming in. By contrast, areas that discourage employees from coming into the office or more makes employees more likely to stay at home. We see the time aspect of being able to save time from commuting, money aspect even, but also some employees naturally perceiving that they are more productive from their own home. But the office is still valued by the vast majority of the ones we've queried in this market study. So all in all, very strong expectations that we now see, and many linked to sort of an employer's ability to attract or retain talent. The office will be an important part of the future, with an emphasis around social collaboration, learning, that many offices or physical offices will need to foster going forward.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Oscar. I now want to invite Vite to join our conversation here around these findings. Employee expectations on the workplace are evidently high, and the data shows that some employees are even willing to resign from their jobs if we don't see a change in this. What do you, Brita, believe has changed in over our time at home on the way we view our work life and our workplaces?
Well, as we can see in this slide, it's evident that people and employees want more flexibility on the job and where to work from. And as we can see here also, there have been some substantial wins with working from home, mainly like time saving and higher productivity. And losing those wins is really a lot harder than gaining new positive aspects. In that sense, we have like a loss aversion as humans. If we have gained something, we value that a little bit less than if we lose something of the equal amount. So I think it's hard to go back. But I also think it's a really big win in this because people have tried new behaviors. They have tried to work in different ways. And we know that work-life balance is one of the most highly valued things that candidates look for when they search for a job. And here, when we see that employees working from home have higher productivity, we can only guess that part of that is that they have been able to find ways of working that are good for them. Maybe different times of the day, maybe to be flexible with getting kids from school, etc. So I think one of the main things that has changed during the pandemic is that employees have been given more freedom, more autonomy to experiment with ways of working and finding things that works better for them. But I also think that a second thing is that we see that work life contains increasingly more complex work tasks. And with the increased digitalization that the pandemic has led to, it becomes more difficult for employees to know what goals to obtain and what to prioritize. And this leads to it can lead to stress and it can lead to confusion. But people that can find that their own personal values are aligned with the purpose of the organization have an easier time to navigate through this uncertainty. So I also think that this trend of more purpose-driven companies has accelerated as employees working from home really need to connect their own values to the company's purpose.
Yeah, really interesting. I think especially the part of how losing something is more costly than the gains from what we can get from coming back in. But as we saw on this slide and the data as well, is that we still feel very strongly about the office and it's still very valuable for us as modern employees. Are there any psychological or scientific explanation to why we as modern employees feel so strongly about the workplace or care so much about having that office to go to? Does it fulfill a specific need for us as human beings? What would you say?
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, most people spend a fair amount of their time at the job or thinking about a job. So it's a really important part of our lives. And of course, the same motivational aspects that we have in our personal life, we have at work. So if you ask people, why do you work? You probably get tons of different answers. But can we find some underlying factors explaining what creates motivation and why it is so important and why people care so much about work? And yes, we can, because psychological research has shown that if we feel like if we have eaten and if we have slept, which is our basic needs, then we can find 5 factors that explains what gives us people joy, well-being, what makes us happy. And that is such a strong drive for people to seek that. And we seek that at work and we seek that at home. And these 5 factors are positive emotions, that we want to laugh and have fun. And of course, you can have that with your colleagues. The most important thing is positive relationships. And it can be just a smile and a hi at the reception desk. And it can be like this deeper conversation with your team members, but to have positive interactions. And then that we find the work meaningful. Probably we work for something that we believe in, the purpose. And then the 2 last thing is to feel engaged, that we get caught up in doing something and enjoying the activity we do. And lastly, that we feel competent. And the work is a great arena for this. We strive for goals and we get positive feedback and we get kicks of reaching those goals. So these 5 factors are essential for all people, but of course, some will satisfy some of them more at home and others at work. So it can take very different approach when we look at it.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So it's really all about learning about your own employees and understanding your organization to find what to prioritize regarding these various needs.
Yeah.
And on that note as well, I want to invite you, Joachim, to this discussion because you've been very involved in our work with Coor Future Workplace and how we have focused on our employees' needs when finding our way towards the future. And we found that we have some varying needs among our employees as well. Do you want to elaborate a bit on how we've used the insights about our own employees in designing our workplace solution?
Yeah, so we did a very elaborate study actually about our own employees. We interviewed more than 30 people around the Nordics and we surveyed them, and we found that there are different behavioral segments, what we call personas, who have somewhat similar needs and who we can group together. And we use those to inform what we should design so they actually want to go to the office. So for instance, one behavior segment is the balancer. It's this person who is in the middle of life with small kids and who needs the flexibility. And we use that persona to inform us about how can we make the workplace a place where it makes people be like having an easier life. How can we create more flexible solutions for them? How can we make it so that they don't lose time to go to the workplace, but they actually save time by going to the workplace? So we used like very deep analysis about who are actually working here to inform us about how we design solutions at the workplace.
So in that case, you can almost say that it's more about minimizing the loss that Brita mentioned here before than finding all of these other gains that you kind of.
There are also other gains, of course, but we definitely looked at how to minimize the loss of losing time on commute and so on.
Yeah. Interesting.
And it is something important to stress, right? When also looking back to the figures, not to draw any general conclusions for all your staff, but to really understand different segments, and that this might vary quite significantly between different employee groups, different lifestyles, what have you.
Definitely.
Yeah, interesting. I want to make time for one last question here to Brita before we move on to our next topic as well. I'm curious because there is this quite new buzzword that people are talking about in the industry right now that's called quiet quitting, which is the kind of notion of doing your job, just your job, and nothing more and nothing less than what you're assigned to do. What are your reflection on this current trend word in relation then to the modern employee and the role of the workplace?
Well, I would say like it's a buzzword. It's nothing new under the sun, but I think it captures something important. And one way of explaining this is to use this psychological term, the fundamental attribution error. And that is a cognitive bias that we people do, that if I come to a meeting and I'm not very active, then I can explain it because, you know, my kid didn't sleep this night, I'm stressed, I have a lot of other things to do. It's all external factors. But if you come to the meeting and you are not engaged and sitting quietly, I perceive it as that's who you are. You are unmotivated. You don't have an interest in this and you don't show creativity. So I give you an internal explanation. And that's easy to do with the quiet quitting, that we say that people aren't engaged and are unmotivated. But we know for a fact that a person's behavior is explained a lot more by the context, by the culture, by how my manager interacts with me, by my team members, than my own personality or who I am. So I think that what this pinpoints, the quiet quitting, is that the articles that have been written about it says a lot that, well, it's the manager's responsibility to ensure that the employees doesn't quiet quit. And I think that's a good way to frame that we need to build a context where we actually increase people's motivation, where we give them autonomy to work, to design the work how they perceive they will solve it best, etc.
Yeah, very interesting. So it's kind of finding that building, not laying everything on the employee or the manager, but kind of co-creating that sense of belonging. And yeah, it's very interesting, I think. Now it's time for us to actually move on to our next subject here and switch over to look at the employer side of things in what we call the employer's dilemma. And navigating in the workplace jungle has been on top of most management agendas over the last years. And we've discussed topics such as how many days one should be at the office or how flexible one should be in offering their employees the freedom of choice regarding their work days, but also on how to attract people back into the offices. And before we go in and discussing this a bit more deeper together with Per Christian, I want to turn to you again, Oscar, to see what are the findings on this topic in the study that we want to share here today.
Yeah, and again, I brought with me, I think, the two most interesting ones. We see now that a majority of companies, 1 in 2 roughly, still struggle with getting a desired office presence or having people come back and work from the office to a desired extent. So that speaks a bit to the term dilemma here. As we saw earlier, flexibility is on the rise or are expected from employees. So this really makes it tricky for many companies in our view. Related to this, we also posed a question to all our decision makers that I should understate that all of these perspectives relates to about their office or remote in-office versus remote working policy. So how are companies mandating their workforce employees to come back to the office? And we see that roughly a quarter are still in a model which states full-time office presence, so you're expected to work full-time from the office. Around 30% is on a more balanced model, so at least 1, 2, 4 days a week from the office. And then we see some moving in a more flexible direction, so letting the closest team manager decide in dialogue with the employee, and around 20%, same amount, that actually gives a full individual flexibility, so having the employees choose for themselves essentially. And again, if we reflect back to the figures we saw earlier with 4 in 10 expecting full-time full individual flexibility in terms of work location, we see or think that based on these 20% that offer this today, many companies have a more flexible route ahead of them, which combined with this challenge of having employees work from the office to a desired extent is a dilemma.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for that, Oscar. It's a very interesting data points, I think. And we can see here that apparently it isn't one obvious solutions for most companies on which route to take here in order to balance the gains for the teams and organization, as well as what the employees want and the desires. However, Storebrand has come quite a long way in designing their hybrid solution and navigating in this dilemma. Isn't that right, Per Christian? Can you tell us a bit about your chosen strategy and how you decided upon that?
Absolutely. So happy to be here. We early decided that one size does not fit all, and that we couldn't foresee the long-term effects here, and we believe that things will change over time. So within a team, for each individual, for us as a company, the solution will probably vary through the year and through the years to come. So we put together a quite large team April 2020 to look at what could be the effects of the pandemic, and we didn't foresee the sort of timeline, but we had a great process and ended up with the decision that teams and the team autonomy should be the core of the approach. So we have no rules, but we have a dilemma. So looking at the slide, I think we're sort of we have a combination of the two in the middle there, because we don't offer 5 days at home for anyone. But the teams need to have a discussion, and each individual also need to have that discussion with themselves, where we have a balance, where we balance your own needs and the needs of the team. And this balance is an ongoing discussion, and we see that teams that have this discussion, for instance, every other month or so, there the people feel much more engaged in the solution they decide on. So let's have 2 examples here. From the start, we believe that innovation would go down as long as the offices were closed. And we firmly believe that when things open up again, we need to come together to make sure that we get the innovation we want. We're actually not so sure about that anymore. So we have learned a lot of things during the way, and we necessarily don't see a one-to-one link between innovation and the need to meet each other. Another example that we talk a lot about these days is my understanding of other people's need for me. So it's easy to understand my own needs and what I want, but there could be needs of other people where they need to have me in the office. And this is a difficult thing to truly understand, and also to some degree respect, because it's not sort of something you can write down that this person has this need for me, but it could actually vary also over time. So it's a dilemma, but as long as you talk about it, we believe there are good solutions.
Yeah, super interesting. And I'm really curious. I almost want to go back to what you said about the innovation and the physical present, and how you kind of realized how these two may not actually be dependent of each other. How did you come to that conclusion or realize that in your work?
Yeah, let me take a sort of detour to answer this question, because people often come to Storebrands and they ask us, how do you get the people back in the office? And we will address that question later on here. But we have 2 main KPIs or indicators about how things are going, right? It's how how our financial results looks like, and how engaged and happy are our people. And these we actually measure people engagement every month in a tool called Peakon. And from the start of the pandemic and until today, we as a company have never had as great financial results and as high people engagement. So as long as these 2 KPIs are higher than ever before, and that we actually are able to launch new products and services to our customers, there is no evidence that the distributed model and the sort of digital way of working has made a negative impact on innovation. Of course, we're still early on, but we are curious about this question and sort of want to understand it more.
Yeah, and you also touched upon the question here about attracting people back into the office. And you say now that it doesn't, the employees necessarily don't need to be at the office in order for you to perform, but do you want to attract them back into the office still? And how do you do that?
We don't want to ask the question how to bring the people back, because actually people have come back regardless of our no rule policy. And I think it's because we're focusing on 3 other questions. And that is, first of all, how can we serve our customers and develop the products and services that they need? And secondly, how do we create an engaging and inclusive workplace? And thirdly, how do we make sure that our employees develop? And if you look at these 3 questions, I think for many companies, the office will be an important tool, but it is not the answer in itself. And I saw that McKinsey had an article some months back, and they said it's not about the office, it's about belonging. And that sort of resonated well with me. So how can we make a feeling of belonging? And there, I think, coming together and sitting around the campfire and get that feeling, that is something we need to do more. But if you have a bullet point meetings, you can have that in your car to the way to the school to deliver your kids, because that is everyday routine. So we need to rethink what we do in the office. And when we rethink that and make and succeed in doing other stuff, I think that will actually get people back. Example, we have the Storebrands Tuesday, which is a day where we say, well, why not have fewer Teams meetings, get to the office, meet the people, and fill the bus. And not we do not have great or large events every Tuesday, but sometimes we have it, and people, they come and they have learned to sort of meet people again and understand the value of it.
Yeah, very interesting to hear how you worked with this dilemma over the last couple of months or a year.
But I can just I need to mention one other thing, because I'm sitting in Oslo.
Yeah.
It's a fairly small city if you look at the world. So I think city size is very important in this question. So if I had an office in London, I wouldn't expect people to be as much in the office as they are in Oslo. Because if you use 2 hours to get to the office, of course you want to be more at home.
Yeah, of course. It's an important perspective to add on to this as well. That it's probably a bigger issue in the bigger cities around the world than in the smaller one. I also want to ask you, Joachim, on this subject of the employer's dilemma, and also what we have listened to here that Per Christian has told us about from a holistic workplace experience perspective. How important do you believe that the physical office is in regard to how we experience them, both the employer and also our workplaces, and kind of reaching what Per Christian has painted out here?
I think it's essential, even if you only visit the office 1 or 2 times per week, then the workplace is sort of the embassy for your company. I really resonated with what you talked about, Per Christian, about belonging and having a place where people actually can come together and have these social events. I think that will be one of the primary drivers for the workplace in the future. That doesn't really matter whether you end up staying in the office 1 or 2 days a week or 5 days a week. No matter what, it will be important, but it will do different things depending on your company and what type of work you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I also want to come back to you, Per Christian, with one last question, at least, before we move on to the next subject. If it feels like, or listening to you, you can kind of say that you have come quite a long way in finding this hybrid solution for your company and your employees. If you could give 3 tips or recommendations to the audience here today on how to succeed with this in their own organizations, what would they be?
Well, firstly, I think it's do not focus on bringing people back, but to create a great workplace. And I think people will come back by themselves. Secondly, think continuous improvement. We're just in the beginning of a completely new way of working. So I hope we can look back 5 years from now and acknowledge that what we did today is not the best way of doing things, because we can do better. And third, share best practice, both internally and with other companies like we're doing today. I think that is a necessary tool to succeed. Yeah,
very good tips and recommendations, I think. And thank you so much, Per Christian, for sharing how Storebrand approaches this employer's dilemma. Before we spend some time on the Q&A and the questions that has come in during the time that we've been talking here, we're going to move on to our last theme for this morning, which is the topic of the future offices or the future work. And all of the things that we have discussed here so far kind of naturally adds up to have an impact on how we design our future workplaces and future offices around the world. So now I think we're all very curious here, Oscar. What does the report say on this last topic?
Yeah. So I would say firstly, luckily, we see that many things aren't standing still. A lot of things are happening. We see that roughly 3 in 5 companies are now planning rather structural changes to their physical office premise. Most common ones being redistribution of the layout, so introducing more social feature, more opportunities to collaborate with teams, creative work, for instance. And also a lot of companies actually relocating offices, so realizing that that's sort of a foundation or their needs could be better suited somewhere else. So that would be the view of the decision makers in the Nordics that we've asked, looking from the employee side of things and what improvements that they foresee would be the most valuable to them. I brought a top list here. The list is quite substantial, quite long, but the top ones are actually, or the number one would be employee wellness and health and well-being, and increased support for that. And that could encompass everything from good ergonomics in the workplace to fitness rooms or wellness rooms of different sort, dressing room or storage for taking the bike to work, for instance. And then we also see increased support for individual focus work, as well as meetings technology. Last one being a theme quite extensively focused since the start of the pandemic, but still an important improvement area in the workplace. We also are specifically around services and services that could potentially increase employees' willingness to come to the office. And the number one category here was lunch, and by a quite far extent, I should say also. So many employees claim that they, with an improved lunch, either quality-wise or in terms of a broader selection, would have an impact in terms of their office presence. And then we can also see access to masseur, as well as arranged fitness activities being very interesting services.
Interesting to hear. Thank you, Oscar. And since Kari is unfortunately sick and couldn't join us today, we'll address this last topic shortly here in the studio together with you guys here from Coor, and also have some input from Brita and Per Christian on this topic. So during this last year, Coor has developed their own perspective, or even may call it a mantra almost, about the future of work in our offices. That is very much based on the input that we have gained from our employees and the market studies that we are conducting frequently. We call it Make Every Moment Matter, and it addresses much of these challenges that we have talked about here today, about finding the tools and make the work tasks and the interactions and the different occurrences matter for both the modern employee, but also adding value for the employer, and so both the people and the business, you can say. And we see that this is something that can be translated both into the physical design, but also the services and our ways of working here at Coor. So, and I know, Joachim, you've been closely involved in designing this overall concept really from the start. Will you shortly describe how Coor sees this shift of purpose of the physical space?
Yes, I think the best way to start is by looking at what the workplace and the white-collar office did historically. And now I'm drawing it up a bit crudely, but I would say it was like a generic space with lots of similar workstations, lots of similar meeting rooms. Then you had a reception where people could come into the office, and maybe you had some coffee machines distributed across the office. But it was very much alike all over the workplace, with some small differences, but you just came in and you were supposed to work. And now we believe that in order for people to actually find value in coming into the office, you need to make every moment matter. And what do we mean by that? We mean that we should design the workplace according to purpose and function, a lot more. So for instance, how can we make the workplace a place where people feel belonging and community, and they can feel the culture? And what does that imply for how we design the workplace and different parts of the workplace? How can we make a workplace where people are creative? And what does that mean for different parts of the workplace? Or what you just addressed earlier, how can we make the workplace a place where people actually feel good, and where the workplace becomes a vehicle for employees' well-being? So it's really these questions that we have tried to address in our own conceptualization. We think that the workplace should not just be a place, it should be a destination for like solving different functions and achieving different purposes.
And maybe even finding, I'm thinking back to what Brita mentioned earlier here as well, about aligning your own values with the company's value and kind of creating that, that platform where you feel connected to the organizations and the people, and that's a part of that organization. Definitely. But we also then, one of the things that we've worked quite a lot with is designing new services for this workplace in order to kind of fulfill these different areas that you mentioned here. Can you give us some few examples of new services or different services that you think can add value?
So as you know, Coor is a service company. We provide services to workplaces, and traditionally we have looked a little bit isolated in the services we provide. So for instance, receptionists or coffee machines or whatever. And in this project, we have made a more holistic approach to all of this. So for instance, community and culture. When we set out to create that in our own workplace, we look at what kind of service roles should we have. What are the tasks, what are the responsibilities, what are the KPIs for this person who will support this. But this is not isolated, because what this person does, this role, obviously interacts with the place, the physical place, and how that has been designed, and also the different products and events and activities that are revolving around the workplace. So we look not only at a service perspective or at an architectural perspective or at a product perspective, but how can we connect the dots between everything? And we really think that is what is needed in order to create a place where every moment matters. Because if you look isolated only at one thing, you never like go the full mile, I would say.
No, I completely agree. So kind of combining all these aspects is our approach to building that future office.
Yes, and just to conclude, so for instance, for community and culture, we have designed a community and well-being manager who has very specific tasks and activities and KPIs that this person is responsible for. And they have like their own community hub in the workplace that we have designed. And we have events and activities and food and beverages and different places in the workplace that supports this. So we have really tried to connect this role with different aspects of the workplace.
And we can also mention then that everything that we're talking about right now, it's due to be kind of initiated in pilots, hopefully within the next couple of months. So that could be good to mention as well in this context. Because I also want to revisit you, Per Christian, here and hear a bit more about your future office, because I know that I'm at least a bit curious here. How are you equipping your workplaces to be better future-proof and more attractive for the modern employee?
I actually want to answer that in two parts. So first of all, I want to mention a big issue we have, and not only Storebrands, but most companies, and that is the waste of office space. So when people now start to work home or remotely, and how many people that actually are in the office vary from day to day, we sit there with a lot of empty space. And I think we need to be better cross companies to actually share more space in the future, because empty spaces are not very sustainable. So that is a big challenge ahead of us all. So just wanted to mention that. But if you look at what we have done in our office, I want to mention the 3 TV studios across Nordics. So during the pandemic, we decided we wanted to improve our visual communication, both to customers and to our employees. So we have built in total 3 studios, and we have hired people from the TV industry, and this has been a massive success. And if you look at the numbers, our customer reach has tenfolded since before the pandemic. So this is something we really believe in, and it has also engaged our own employees a lot. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely. So, and about these TV studios, you use them mostly in the marketing purpose, or can you use them for other sorts of meetings that you have in the office as well?
Yeah, we have approximately 4 out of 5 events are for customers, and then 20% of what we do is internally focused. So we use it in learning and development. We use it for larger meetings, because we have seen that this is actually better than meeting physically, because people can both hear and see what is being sort of put on the screen. And but mostly it is to customers. Yeah.
Interesting to hear. And I also want to jump a bit back, because something that we haven't really talked that much about yet is well-being, and it's one of the top requirements or wishes from the employees that we saw earlier in the data here. And I think I want to ask you actually, Rita, since it is one of the top requested improvements in the office, how should organizations think if they want to kind of design an office that also enhances wellness and well-being? Is there something that it can do from a psychological perspective?
This is a really interesting question, I think, because you can just jump directly to make the improvements that the employees ask for, like having a massage therapist or have better lunch options. But I would say to pause and reflect a bit, because probably this isn't truly what they want. It's more a symptom of how they are feeling for the moment. If you are feeling stressed, or if you're feeling like you don't have control, an easy option is to give me lunch options, or give me dinner options that I can take home to my family, or at least I can have 1 hour of relaxation at the massage therapist. But that won't really solve the challenge of creating a workplace and an office that sustains well-being. And I think here we need to stop thinking of our human bodies like batteries, like a phone that recharge slowly during the day, and then you plug it in during the night and you're full of energy again. People don't recharge energy by having massage. Well, maybe a little bit, but not fully. People recharge energy by coming into contact with positive emotions, to feeling joy, belonging, like you all been talking very much about, to feeling this meaningness and engagement, and to feel as little as negative emotion as possible. We will always feel quite a lot of them, but to minimize uncertainty. For example, what Per Christian just said about the information, to use a TV channel internally to communicate, that's amazing. You make the information accessible to everyone, and those who want to see it again, to understand, they watch it again. So this is a way to give employees control and possibly to feel more engagement. And another thing, I mean, it's a lot of things to do around this, but I think we talk a lot about engagement. You asked me about quiet quitting before, and how do we create engagement in organization? You know, we can read a lot about it. We can find a lot of McKinsey reports that says how we should do it. But in the end, it's the employees and the managers in the organization that needs to do these behaviors. So I think that if we're talking about having physical gyms to do yoga, why aren't we talking about having behavioral gyms? For example, a leadership gym where leaders can go into, it's a physical room, leaders can go into that and practice difficult conversation through VR glasses. Or maybe, speaking of the belonging, meet another leader that has the same needs and connect cross-functional. So I think it's my take on building an office that creates well-being is to go back to those 5 factors I talked about before. Positive emotion, positive relationship, the feeling of achievement, reaching goals, engagement and meaningfulness, and design the office to help employees reach those 5 aspects.
Very interesting. So you can almost say that it should be a palette of different aspects to create that well-being as well, because it's not the same that's needed for everyone, and we need both the physical well-being but also kind of this emotional and engagement enhancing well-being as well.
Yeah. And can I say just one quick win, I think, is that because here we see that employees want to recharge their energy, massage and food, etc. But what we know from research is that breaks are like food. You need to have them 5 times a day for them to work. You can't save the break until the end of the day or until the weekend. So if organization, and I read a lot of this in your report, I think you have very smart ideas of how to create an environment that facilitates these small breaks. Like perhaps 5 minutes mindfulness in a pod chair somewhere or something. That I think is a quick win for the physical office.
Yeah, definitely. Or curated walks around the block or something, just to get that quick break and collecting energy. Now we need to make some use the last few minutes here for some questions that we've received here from the audience as well. But before I get all of these questions here with me, I want to ask you a question here, Per Christian, as well, because we have talked a lot about what you're doing and what you're doing, what has succeeded and what have worked. Do you have anything that's kind of your challenge that you're working on at the moment right now, or anything that hasn't gone as well as you thought from the beginning? Anything you want to share?
Well, one big surprise actually was that although people want and get flexibility, they want to have their own seat in the office. So yes, it will be empty 3 days a week, but it still needs to be my seat. That is somewhat surprising. So that is a challenge. But yeah, as I mentioned, the waste of office space, that is the biggest pain point, and it takes time to fix it because most of us are in long-term contracts. But we look 5 years ahead when we will have a new concept, and we need to find other solutions to make sure that we utilize the space we have, either we utilize them ourselves, or other people can come and actually use the space.
Yeah, I think that many can recognize themselves and their organization in those two challenges. Is at least something that I recognize from having dialogues with many of the organizations out there about this topic. Let's see. I'm going to pick one of these questions here then. Let's take this one. Many speak of the office as this place for creativity, but how do you really design a creative and innovative place? And I think, do you want to start off by reflecting on this, Britta? Is there something that we can do in order to kind of design an environment that enhances creativity and innovation?
I think that firstly, we need to recognize what does our human race need to have to be creative. If we feel stressed, we have this tunnel vision and we only see problems and we get into this problem-solving mode. So we need to be in an emotional state where we feel safe. So the psychological safety that organizations talk a lot about is important. That means that we probably can't just put people into a room and have a creative brainstorming workshop. That will only be like a power struggle to see, can I say this? What will the consequences be? So actually thinking about, if we have this workshop where we meet, how can we, before that, build up to this safe environment? For example, I don't know, sending out a video presentation or having a panel debate in the TV studio. Yeah. And also to have structures that help people to early on in such a workshop make everybody speak, for example.
Yeah, super interesting. I don't know if you want to add something, Joachim, as being our creative passionate here in the studio.
Well, I think most workplaces are designed according to like rational linear thinking. We need to be productive and we need to be effective. But there's not that much room for like just getting loose a bit and having fun in the office. And I think that's a problem actually. Because if you are to be creative, you have to think in a dialia manner. You have to think about things that are not necessarily something that your rational brain would have thought out. And in order for you to come into that mood, that environment, as Britta mentioned, I think that's very important. You need to feel psychologically safe, but you also need to have fun. You need to like let loose a bit. So how can we make places in the workplace a place where you can have fun and let loose, and where it's okay not to be like a rational businessman or businesswoman for once?
Yeah, very interesting. And I wish that we, or do you want to add something? Or
no, I think it covered very well, but really the play and the joyfulness in the workplace, I think a lot of companies can have a further focus on. And also to Britta's point, starting off in or being geared the right way, coming into a creativity activity, starting off in wellness and yeah, not being stressed, etc.
Yeah, interesting, definitely. Yeah, so now we only have 1 minute left, unfortunately, so it's time to kind of round up this discussion. But I think we can all agree that we need to create this fun and diverse workplace where we can all feel a sense of belonging to our teammates and to the organization, and kind of co-create that together, and not putting all of the responsibility on single functions or individuals within the organization. I want to thank you, Britta and Per Christian, and as well as Oscar or Joachim, of course, here in the studio, for sharing very interesting insights on these topics today. Hopefully all of you who's been listening also found it very interesting and learningful. The report that we presented the data from here today can be found on all local websites, on all local Coor websites. And we will also include links to that in the email that we'll send out after this webinar. In that email, you will also find the contact information if you have any further questions that wasn't addressed here today. as well as the recording from the webinar if you want to look back at something that we discussed here today. So thanks again, and I wish you all a very great Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you.